I remember loving spider webs when I was a kid, like a perfect orb web. I could sit there, and I remember my parents telling me that they thought I was weird for once because I'd be a little kid just sitting there watch a spider making a web, but it was so perfect. Everything was, the lines were perfect, the angles were perfect. Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. It's, you obsess about things and you have compulsive actions or compulsions. It's an alarm. It's a blaring red alarm. You can't focus on anything else because the longer you leave it, the louder it gets and the brighter it gets, to the point where it's all you can see and hear and feel. That's what OCD is. Unless it's attached to something else, I wouldn't say it's life-threatening. In that way, it makes you feel like it's not as severe as heavy depression or PTSD or any of those things. But in order to be a good functioning member of a community, you need to be able to deal with it. And if you're not dealing with it, you're not a good functioning member of community at all. You're taking away more than you're giving. OCD can take a bunch of different courses. It can be different kinds of behaviors. It could be movement of objects. It could be your surroundings. Mine in particular was more sanitation, like washing hands all the time. I was a bit of a germ freak, well, more than a little bit as a child. For example, my mother touching the garbage can and then not washing her hands after, sort of thing. You're very perceptive when you're obsessive compulsive, is you pick up on every little thing, and you just feel this increasing, it's not a sound, but an awareness of, when you use a sound as an example, it feels louder and louder and louder and louder, and it doesn't take very long to get to the point where it's overly consuming. It makes it very hard to function when those alarm bells are going off. It was a lot by feel. It doesn't have to make sense. It wasn't, I really had to just feel clean. You just keep washing your hands, then you touch something else and you have to go wash your hands. Again, it's 30 seconds later, and then you go touch something else and you have to wash your hands. You prepare food and you have to wash your hands before you prepare the food, and you just get so chapped that the back of your hands are bleeding. You get finger splits and around the corners of your fingers and stuff.
With OCD, people have obsessions and they have compulsions, right? There are certain things that they'll do, there are certain patterns that they follow in order to help them with their anxiety. People believe that if they don't do what they're doing repetitively, then their anxiety is going to get worse or something bad's going to happen. Again, it becomes a problem because a lot of us have little quirks and little things that we do, but it becomes a problem when it affects your functioning, when it gets to the point where it's unhealthy, where it's affecting your life, where it's taking over.
I didn't think it was different or wrong. I was, that's just the way it was, right? My drawers had to be set up right with my laundry. Books had to be arranged correctly on shelves. Even when I played games, like with little models or anything, it took more time to set stuff up than to actually play. It was almost always just I could get close, but there was always one little thing wrong, and you learn to deal with close. I don't know if that lent itself towards me being a bit of a loner, or I almost didn't prefer to play with other people because they'd mess everything up. I believe I was in grade 7 or 8 when I first had to go. I didn't seek treatment. My parents wanted me to go get treatment, and saw a psychiatrist and doctor and was prescribed Zoloft, and for me it didn't help. They kept increasing the dosage, and for whatever reason it didn't help. It just made me feel worse, to be honest.
All medications have side effects, like even the non-psychiatric ones. The psychiatric medications have side effects that are very unpleasant. Sometimes some things that I've heard people talk about is that the medication changed who they were. They feel like a zombie, right? And that can happen depending on what medication they're on, what doses. So what I would recommend to people who are having side effects is talk to your doctor, whoever it is, your family doctor, your psychiatrist. Let them know what are side effects you're having and see if there are ways around it.
Because you have it forever, it's hard to pinpoint what it would be like in that transition into high school, other than it made you not want to spend time with a lot of people, I guess. You just feel like people cause you anxiety. And it's not that you don't want to be out there, but you almost don't want to interact with other people because they're going to make you feel anxious. But we had a couple really good gym teachers in my high school that were really awesome at teaching how to use stuff, and weightlifting programming, you get to build a structure. I remember doing some overhead pressing and it just felt right, like the lines felt right. It was smooth. It was only 95 pounds, which is, who cares what 95 pounds is, but when you're a kid and you're able to clean 95 pounds and then push it overhead the first time you tried it, then the lockout felt perfect and it looked like something you'd see on a poster. I remember that, and it felt good, and I wanted to do that again, and then I wanted to do it again and again and again. That same movement, to the point where all that day I just did the exact same movement over and over and over again because it felt right. Like, it felt, those alarm bells weren't going off. They weren't going off at all. They were just, everything was almost peaceful. Weightlifting was just order and peace and something I could really enjoy.
Generally speaking, there's a whole bunch of different mechanisms. So it's not just the brain that would drive sort of that relationship between exercise and mental health. One of the mechanisms that is understood would be related to sort of the brain chemistry. Also, many people engaging in exercise, they're either doing exercise with someone else or at least in an environment where they see others. So there's a social aspect that is driving sort of that brain on exercise. And then there's the psychosocial, which relates to the more mastery, the coping, the sort of distraction hypothesis. And then also the thermogenic is really the one where, if you exercise, you're improving your body's temperature, and that temperature increase is something that improves mental health. And then there's, the last of them is sort of what we call the anthropomorphic idea, but really it's just this idea that through history, humans have become more and more sedentary, and so we were meant to be more active than we are.
The more you start feeling good, the more you want to do it, right? I really started to obsess about lifting. I wanted to be at the gym. I needed to eat the way I needed to eat to get the way I needed to be. And for somebody who enjoys structure and math and planning, that really helped a lot. Which is why I guess I moved more towards the strength aspect as opposed to the bodybuilding aspect. Bodybuilding is half art, half science, where you're trying to develop a physique, and whereas powerlifting and strength sports are this percentage of this percentage will lead to this if you do it this many times, and it felt right. Everything felt right.
Weightlifting is something that it's in your control. So it's something that you see, there's a ton of numbers. It's very judgment based and from an individual. So you can create this very controlled environment very quickly with weight training. And I think that's probably the #1 reason why weight training is one of the exercises that people would go towards. There's also differences, again, like we say with exercise in general, we don't really know the mechanisms that tie these different exercises to the outcomes, but we do know that resistance training is associated with reducing symptoms of fear and anxiety, for example, and that loss of control.
There are days where you're having off days. There's always going to be days you just didn't sleep enough, you worked too hard, you didn't. For whatever reason, you're going to have off days. But when you still get into those positions and you still set up the same and there's that structure again, and it's something you can control. When I walk up to the bar, I just feel it goes across that line on my feet that it needs to go across. And then when I bend over and I grab the bar, it's on those lines where it's supposed to be on those lines. And then when I take that breath and get back into position, it's my knees are where they're supposed to be and my shoulders are over the bar and I'm in position for my lift. And when I can execute it smoothly, that's awesome. It feels good. When I don't execute it smoothly, it's not so good. Half the time you're blacked out. You can't see anything when you're at the top of that big heavy lift. Sometimes you have to stay there for a little bit to have things come back into focus. You're not there, you're somewhere else, and it's calm and everything is, you almost hear nothing but that ringing and maybe the rush of your heart in your head. And other than that, nothing else exists at that time. There's nothing else. It's weird. Most people don't equate weightlifting with peace because there is an aggressive aspect to it, and which is awesome because you need to be able to explore the aggressive side of yourself. But the ability to feel like something's going right is an incredible feeling for somebody who always feels those alarm bells going off where nothing's quite perfect. Because that's what you're obsessing about, it almost leaves the rest of your stuff alone because it's latched onto that now. Movement for people with OCD is critical because we're physical beings. We need to find that. We need to latch onto that aspect of ourselves and explore it and find that movement that makes us feel like everything is okay in the moment, like that perfect movement. Seek that out. It's allowed me to focus that obsessive energy on one thing as opposed to it leaking out into other things like relationships, like having to wash my hands all the time. And I wouldn't have been able to do that before. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do that before. It can definitely be a strength, depending on what it latches onto and how you deal with it. It can also be something that interferes with your whole life, making you not function at all. So it depends on how you deal with it. If you're somebody who obsesses, or you've got depression, or you've got any of those, where you are isn't helping. Go explore and find something that makes you feel better. Be it weightlifting, martial arts, archery, whatever. Go explore and get out of that and find something that makes you feel better. You have to move. You have to. That's a whole aspect of our humanity that you have to explore and find yourself in. Whether it's the savage side of yourself or whether it's the noble side of yourself, you need to find and explore that part of humanity inside yourself and look for that perfect movement. When you find it, you'll know.